I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
And I'm JT Timmons.
And today we have a very special guest with us, a former Savannian, now living in Salem, Massachusetts. We have Julie. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am so happy to be with you all. Thank you for having me. I'm Julie Roundtree, and as mentioned, I do live up in Salem, Mass. these days. I am an actor with a background in Shakespeare. I teach at a local college called Endicott College, and I am currently going back to graduate school at Brandeis University. And over there, I am in a women's gender and sexuality studies program, and my focus is witches. And I am actually looking at representations of witches and other magical wielding beings and how those representations have changed over time and what that tells us as a result.
Very cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's like, when I remember when you first talked about you going back to school and you were talking about what you were going to study, I was like, you can do that? You can get a degree in witches? A
degree in witches?
That's so fun. That's so cool. Yes. So witches are one of my favorite topics to talk about besides ghosts. So you mentioned earlier that you especially like to talk about how witches were represented in media, especially in the 90s. What would your favorite witch be from the 90s?
That's a good question. I guess I have a couple. I recently wrote a paper comparing the craft and practical magic.
Oh my gosh, that sounds great.
Cool.
So certainly I love all of the witches represented in those movies for different reasons. But I'm also a big fan of Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even though in some ways the representation of Willow as a witch is a bit troubling, because I have read that was supposed to be a metaphor for drug use.
Oh.
So I don't love that. I'd rather it just be that she's plain and simple supposed to be a witch.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe as a number one favorite, maybe Sally from Practical Magic. I think she really resonates with me. So that's the Sandra Bullock character.
I love
very Thor with lots of powers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's your favorite too, right, babe?
I love Practical Magic.
Yeah.
There is a house when we were in Minnesota that we drove by that looked just like the Practical Magic house. And I was like, JT, I've never considered living in Minnesota, but this house.
And then we looked it up and it was like $400,000. And I'm like, that's
a beautiful Victorian house.
It's gorgeous. So. It was gorgeous. Right on Lake Superior. It was, It was really, really cool.
But so interestingly enough, I always love watching, when watching movies about witchcraft and witches in general, seeing how accurate they can be with witchcraft. Which one would you say would be the most accurate to true witchcraft and less of the Hollywood romanticized version of it?
Sure. And everyone, that's Piper.
Yes, that's Piper.
Yeah, Piper would like to be part of the podcast. I don't think she can make a literal appearance, but she might bark a little bit. Gosh, that's a good question. Piper, I love you. Stop. I don't really know. I might be inclined to say practical magic again, because it's not the craft.
Yeah.
The craft goes way on a tangent with Nancy's character, though I love me some Perusa Balk. But I like the fact that in practical magic they use a lot of herbs and tinctures, and to me that's a brand of witchcraft that really appeals to me. And they're pretty good at not doing anything to harm anybody who isn't harming them.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. And we mentioned the Salem Witch Trials earlier, and will you tell us a little bit about what we talked about, like about 10 minutes ago when we were talking about what we're going to talk about in the podcast. You mentioned that the Salem Witch Trials. There's a reason why you didn't study those in particular.
Yeah. So, and I still honestly every single day have a moment where I want to go back and study them because they are so interesting, and I'm right here in Salem. I can walk to the Witchcraft Memorial, I can walk to Gallows Hill from where I live. But I originally wanted to study them because I wanted to try to get to the root of what really happened and pinpoint one thing, but I really don't think you can.
Sure.
What caused the hysteria was a bunch of bored girls who were playing fortune-telling games, which was absolutely not okay when you're a Puritan, because Puritans took Christianity and took basically all of the fun out of it. They had so many very staunch, strict rules that I think living in that time period and living in that kind of community, it was almost like a power keg, waiting to explode, So the girls dabbling in witchcraft or fortune telling, technically, them doing that, there was, and there have been studies about ergo poisoning. You guys have maybe heard about it. It's a form of poisoning associated with rye bread. And it causes people to hallucinate and have lots of awful gastrointestinal problems. And so there was a decent amount of study put into whether the girls got a hold of that. Mm. But the trials and the symptoms associated with the hysteria went on for 13 months, and none of the adults were responding that way, so it probably wasn't the ergo poisoning. But I do think that it was really fear. More than anything, I think it was fear associated with being Puritans and being afraid of the other anything. And it was fear of Native Americans coming, and because there was a recent war, so there were always big concerns that Native Americans would come and pillage land, and the land that did belong to them, of course. But so I think I'm battling, but I do think that fear overall was what caused the hysteria. And I think religion is what caused the hysteria. The Puritan Church, and their particular ideology is what caused everything to sort of have a ripple effect from there.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. I think that's a common theme through all of the different witch trials throughout world's history. It's also this fear of powerful women. It's I know how that it was like that in Edinburgh too, because they're oh, this woman knows things that she's not supposed to know, drown her in the lake. So I think that's a big part of it too, is trying to keep the patriarchy alive in the society.
Absolutely.
Especially in such a volatile state, because it was a new country, it was a new colony, that makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of powerful women, that's a big topic of interest for me in the program that I'm in. And So many of the women that were accused were midwives or, like Bridget Bishop, the first woman who was executed. She was accused of witchcraft a couple of times, and likely because she spoke her mind. She got in fights with men because like chickens from other farms wandered onto her farm, and she would yell at somebody about it. And she also owned her own property. They found puppets in her wall that she let children play with. And she also had a third nipple.
Oh.
That's fun.
Really?
Fun little that comes out in tours around here. She had a third nipple, which really could have been any sort of birthmark.
Oh, yeah.
But when you were accused of witchcraft, you were dragged into town and stripped down in some public place. And then, it was horrific. And then people would look all over your body trying to find these birthmarks. And if you had so much as a skin tag, it was believed to be a devil's mark or a witch's teat.
Wow.
Where you were suckling your demon familiar given to you by Satan.
Goodness gracious.
That is so extreme. I've never heard that about her. That's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and they looked for those marks on everybody who was accused, including the men too. So, of course, this time period is very much about satanic witchcraft and not pagan witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? I mean, I kind of know the difference, but for a lot of people, I know that there are a lot of people, especially people who are more religious. Maybe some of our listeners who are a little bit more religious who think pagan is satanic witchcraft. Mm-hmm. Maybe could you help us differentiate the two?
Sure. Well, I think generally with pagan witchcraft, most people who ascribe to those beliefs don't even believe in the devil or Satan. So it's kind of a moot point to try to compare the two. But satanic witchcraft, I think it originated maybe with old Slavic tales of Baba Yaga.
Okay.
I have my Baba Yaga earrings on, actually.
You have your
Yeah, I do.
Here, show the can.
Yes.
That's the Baba Yaga. It has little chicken feet.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. But yeah, so she's the sort of quintessential story of the old mean lady in the woods who would try to lure children to her hut, and her hut was like up on chicken legs and surrounded by skulls. And I just shared this story in my folklore class the other day. But there is thought that a lot of the mean, nasty old women witches associated with satanic witchcraft come from that original story. And that's where we see them fairy tales. And then they become associated with Satan and the devil because of Puritanism and that fear of the other.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there was a belief, I'm sure you have you seen the movie The Witch?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
I showed that to my college students the other day and had to be like, so guys, this gets weird at points. And, and I would look out in the audience and they would just be staring.
Was that movie an accurate representation of like, I don't know, witches or satanic witchcraft?
I think it's a very good representation, certainly of Puritanism during that time period.
Absolutely.
How isolated families were. And I do, from what I know, think that it's a good depiction of what people believed satanic witchcraft to be.
Gotcha. All right.
Finding a way to the devil in his book, and then becoming essentially his to do with whatever he wants. Mm-hmm. And then paganism is a totally different thing. It tends to be earth-centered and, like I said, have nothing to do with the devil. And there are lots of different kinds of paganism. the girls in Practical Magic are good examples of pagan witches.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
I would definitely classify the women in Practical Magic as more green witches, because, you know, just people who use what's from the earth to make to amplify their powers, essentially, because there's lots of different paths with witchcraft. We're learning all about witchcraft on this episode, so might as well go into it. But yeah, there's all sorts of different paths that you can take with witchcraft. Some of them lean into some darker stuff, some lean into lighter things, some lean more into earth and different stuff. Wiccans believe in a whole different realm of, you know, things. So yeah, I always like Practical Magic because, one, it's a feel-good movie, but, you know, it's it really does show, like, especially where a lot of people start with their witchcraft.
Sure. You
know, a lot of people start in that green space because people feel connected with earth.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah.
Cool.
But so what would your favorite story from Salem be? I know that's a very loaded question, but
that's a really good question. I mean, weirdly, my favorite part of Salem still to this moment is kind of the reason that I moved here, and that was because I had a dream about coming here.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
I have weird dreams sometimes, and I had a dream that I was teaching Huckleberry Finn, of all things. I've never taught Huckleberry Finn, to a group of college students outside, and I realized that I was in Salem, Massachusetts, despite it not really looking like Salem, Massachusetts. And when I, the next day, woke up, I was like, okay, well, I'm curious. So I started looking at colleges in the Salem area, and the college that I work for now had a big photo of Huckleberry Finn in.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
But so just like the personal reason that I ended up here, that's kind of a fun little anecdote. But I would say maybe not my favorite story, but my favorite person to study around here is Bridget Bishop, the first woman who died in the trials. I just think she was a really, really cool, forthright individual. If you've read The Discovery of Witches, she pops up in those books as well. So it's just, to me, it's neat to walk among that kind of history on a regular basis. And she is supposed to haunt a number of locations in the area. She was the first person to be accused and to be executed. Well, not the first person to be accused, excuse me. She was the first person to be executed. Sadly, the first being to be executed was actually a dog. Was believed to have ingested evil. But that's a whole different story. It involves girls peeing into a bucket and then turning that into a cake.
Wow. That's that.
Yeah, we can hear that story. Yeah.
So I'm sure you've heard of the character Tituba.
Yes.
From the Crucible and from history, she's usually considered to be from Barbados, and John Proctor brought her back from Barbados as an enslaved individual. But what really happened is she was an enslaved individual for the Paris family, Reverend Paris's family. And she, once the girls started acting out, they were having hallucinations, they were crawling on the floor acting like dogs, they were trying to throw themselves into the fire, they were going mute. This is what people were witnessing, and what some doctors deemed as being like, these girls are bewitched. Somebody has bewitched them. So, of course, if you imagine from the perspective of a Puritan, that's terrifying, because it means essentially there's the devil in your house and it's affecting your children. But Tituba, with her background in magic, told a next door neighbor, Mary Sibley, to bake a witch cake. And some people just call it a pea cake because it involved all of the afflicted girls peeing into a bucket and then them combining it with rye and flour, I think, and making a cake out of it. And then they fed the cake to a dog. The idea is that when the dog bites into that cake, the person responsible for doing the bewitching should feel pain and cry out. I know it's really good science.
Yeah.
Yes.
Goodness.
Also, it's obviously a form of magic.
Yes.
Witchcraft. So they're using this form of magic to try to figure out who has bewitched the girls. And what ended up happening is obviously no one cried out. The dog got really sick.
Oh,
they
man.
thought that in the dog, and they ended up hanging the dog, which always makes me really sad. So that was actually the first victim of the Salem Witchcraft Trials was a dog.
I didn't know that.
Poor puppy.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know, it makes me so mad.
Yeah, for sure.
The dog didn't want this.
No.
No, the dog didn't want to eat a PK.
That's so
But-
interesting, though.
It is.
Yeah, and so Reverend Paris, when he found out about this, was actually really upset, and that's one of the reasons that Tituba ended up getting in trouble and having to go to trial.
I see.
Because she probably practicing a form of magic.
Gotcha.
Wow, that's why do they not talk about that more often? I mean, honestly, that is such an interesting story that I had no idea about at the witch trials. Now, if you wanted to visit Bridget Bishop in Salem, is her grave still there, or is there like a memorial to her?
So the graves of most of the people who were executed, we don't really have. There are a couple of people, I think, who are buried on Rebecca Nurse's land. She was one of the more prominent and beloved older folks who ended up being executed in the trials. But most of the other people, their bodies were cut down and just left to roll down the hill. It's really horrific. We do, however, have a beautiful memorial set up in Salem where there's kind of like a stone bench for each and every individual who was executed. So there are 20 of them. And they each have their names and the dates of their deaths.
Wow.
And there's a local tour guide who's also a witch who comes every week and puts flowers and other mementos on those benches to kind of remind people what they are, because especially in Halloween, the town gets mobbed. People are sitting on the benches and not even really recognizing what they're doing.
Sure.
And we try to keep it as much of an actual memorial as possible, and pay your respects to everyone there.
Yeah.
So what's a common misconception people have about witches? What's the most common misconception that people have about witches? I should rephrase that.
That they will curse you in some way. Most modern day witches don't even believe in that sort of thing. Believe in something like karma.
Gotcha.
What you put out there, that energy is going to come right back to you. That all witches are associated with the devil, when most, again, modern day witches don't even believe in the devil. And who knows, I'm not even sure if satanic witches, my dog's knocking over things. She's doing that at the best possible time.
It's fine. It's okay.
But I'm not even sure if satanic witches, I mean, I'm sure they existed in some capacity, but they certainly didn't exist in the capacity that people made it out that they did. So, I think witches, for the most part, over the years, have been people who are much closer to the pagan definition.
I see.
Than the satanic definition that has been layered on top of them.
Okay.
There was certainly witchcraft going on during the period, but that was in the form of midwives and people who were making tinctures and salves that had been passed down through generations. And then, of course, that was taken over by the medical field.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
One of my favorite witches that I learned about, not like a specific witch, but like type of witch that I learned about in Salem when I went there a few years ago, was the country witch. I always thought that was interesting for pop culture because the country witch is the reason why we always saw witches depicted as green. Because they would be out in the field picking herbs and stuff, and their thumbs would turn green. And so people would see that and be like, oh, their skin is turning green. And that's, yeah. And so that then it started to evolve into, the Wicked Witch of the West. She's all green, Elphaba, things like that. But that's where it came from. And I was like, that is so interesting.
That is interesting.
I'd never heard that before. That's really cool.
I saw it at the, I think it's the Witches Museum, the one with the cheesy one with all the mannequins, That
might be the witch, well, it could be a couple of them, to be quite honest. But Witch Dungeon Museum, and that one does have, like, a lot of, like, 1970s mannequins.
Yeah.
So that's probably the one.
So how much do you know about the Bell Witch?
I don't know much at all.
Okay. I didn't know because I know she's not even like, close to Salem, Massachusetts. I just didn't know if you knew about the Bell Witch, because she's like one of my favorites. Like I feel
like the term witch though for the Bell Witch is or like not, it's given to the wrong entity, because the Bell Witch is definitely more of a demonic entity in my opinion. But I'm sure you would agree with this, Julie, is in a lot of folklore and writings and stuff, people just assign witch to things that they find evil, or or they
like maybe like female and evil.
Yes, equals witch.
Yeah, so if a demon is posing as a female, it's like witch.
Yes.
Oh, well, there's the math there.
Yeah.
There's the science. Interesting.
No, I totally agree with everything you just said, Madison. I actually just wrote, I haven't finished it yet. I'm in the process of writing a paper called Hags and Seductresses.
Oh, wow.
And it's about the categories that we tend to put witches in the media, either making them like the old scary lady who's cast off and not attractive and satanic, or the attractive young witch who is in some way, even if she's not doing active seducing, she is very attractive, and in media we will see like the male gaze follow her a lot.
Okay.
And so sort of what I'm trying to prove with this paper is that these categories for witches, while that's unfair to witches, it's also a way that we categorize women. And
sure.
And as a result of that, particularly in film and in television, we don't really have room for like women like me. I'm 41 years old. Like normal, regular women in the media, you don't see them as much. And I think some of that goes back to the fairy tale ways that we categorize people. Absolutely.
Because it was the same way with the, remind me of the name, from the Japanese mountain witch that we read about.
Yamauba?
Yes, Yamauba, thank you. Yamauba was the same way. And I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she would be great for this paper, because she was the creature that was cast off during times of poverty. Usually the elderly were the ones that were cast off because they had the least amount of time, so they would send her out into the woods, and because she was cast off, she would turn into this mountain witch of sorts, and she would cause evil in the mountains of Japan. And I feel like it dates back, that's from like the 1300s too. So it goes back even further than I think just even modern times, because of just the way society was built. And she's not the only one. I mean, there's, even in Appalachia, the Appalachian Mountain Witch, it used to be kind of the old scary lady in the hills and the hollers.
And people, like I lived in North Carolina for a while, and people do still believe in that kind of lore, and they still believe in that kind of lore in like rural Scotland and Ireland. What was the name of the Japanese?
Yes, Yama-uba.
Yama-uba. Yeah.
Definitely that up. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, how would you describe your specialty as it ties into witchcraft?
So I am looking specifically at the way that we have depicted witches, particularly in the media, not just film and television, but also like makeup campaigns, clothing, that sort of marketing. Like you see over the place right now, because we're getting into October, like bewitching makeup, and there's a girl with really, really dark makeup on, and she looks sort of like one of the girls from The Craft. So I'm looking at the ways that those visual representations of witches have been at certain time periods and how they have changed from time to time. So, for example, if I start in the 90s looking at the women in Practical Magic and The Craft and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Charmed, then I'll look also at the witch as we move forward, and I'll look at Sabrina and see, what does this say about our treatment of women, and what does this say about our treatment of others, like of the others in terms of magical wielding others as well, and how we see them, and how accurate is it. So I also have an interest in anthropology, and the program that I'm in is closely associated with the anthropology program at Brandeis, so I'm in a bunch of anthro classes right now. So I'm probably going to do some field work and actually reach out to a number of pagan folks that I know. I'll probably reach out to you guys too.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And ask questions about, and I haven't formulated the questions yet, so I don't know exactly what I'll say, but specifically wanting to know how people who actually do believe themselves to be witches, how they feel about those representations.
Oh, wow.
And also reach out to some folks who have done some scholarship before me. And, just do that sort of field work and incorporate that into my own personal point of view.
Awesome. And have y'all talked about what witchcraft like you're into, like what you do?
Well, so my personal path of witchcraft, if y'all didn't know already, if you couldn't tell by the everything about me, is my personal witchcraft that I subscribe to tends to lean more into nature. I have always referred to nature as my church, and which I think is hilarious because people love to say that, especially in the South, that nature is the devil's church, which might be because of the pagan roots that originate with witchcraft and all of that in nature in general. But a lot of it does lean into that side. I also lean into my Celtic roots. I also lean into my Appalachian roots. So mine's like a big Mod Podge of like folk magic and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like when most men, bring their wives flowers to surprise them, I bring her a hagstone.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, JT's very good. Oh yeah, JT's very good about like, we'll be hiking or something and he'll pick me something. He's like, this is for your altar. And so it's really cute. But yes. Yeah, well, everybody's got their own path with witchcraft, and I kind of mentioned that earlier. It's, it has a lot of flexibility. It doesn't have to be one set thing. And I think a lot of people, especially modern day witches now, have decided to go back to their roots because, people, especially with the rise of ancestry and things like that, people are starting to figure out where exactly they're from. They are feeling connected to their ancestors again. And digging back up all of those pagan belief systems to a degree, that were erased with the rise of Christianity.
Sure.
You know, where basically a lot of the Christian, I'm sorry if you are Christian and this offends you, but like a lot of, you know, Christian rituals of sorts were taken from pagans, and they were just rebranded and created into something, which is totally fine and dandy. But, you know, some people are going back to what it originally was.
Sure.
And making it their own.
And but before I met you, Madison, I thought of witches exactly how the rest of most of the country thinks of witches. I did. I mean, and then you kind of like introduced me into what, you know, witchcraft can be, what it actually is. But I do have a question, Julie. Is there actually, like, can there be evil witches? Can there be? Because she's made it, she's kind of like told me about witchcraft, and now I don't see witches as evil anymore. But can there be that evil witch?
I think, as with any religion, with any belief system, there are people who can go a dark path. And, you know, and there are people who are witches who will go out of their way to try to bend the will of others, which is something you're not supposed to do, to do any sort of darker magic. And I wouldn't necessarily classify those folks as evil. I would say that they're misguided.
Okay.
And they're, you know, it's kind of like I worked in a voodoo shop down in New Orleans, and we constantly had people coming in and saying things like, so how do I hex my ex? Or can you make a doll that looks like, and then they describe their boss. And you're like, no.
Oh my gosh.
I think voodoo is like the most misinformed practice of witchcraft, for sure.
Yeah.
When we went to New Orleans recently, like last year, we took a whole tour that was on voodoo with a voodoo high priest, and he spent the entire tour. We thought, you know, it was going to be like kind of, you know, like a, kind of kitschy sort of thing where like, they're like, oh, this is how, this is voodoo dolls, and this is this, and this is what we do, like where we, you know,
we thought that they were going to give the tourists what they want.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. And I think there was pretty much everybody on that tour, except for like maybe me, who was expecting that. And I think they were a little disappointed because voodoo is not like that at all. And
we're even saying it wrong. He said it's voodoo.
It's voodoo. Yes, technically
like,
it is voodoo is how he said it. But you know, he said you can still say voodoo. It's totally fine, just so people don't look at you like you've got a crazy like, you know,
you don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but he spent the whole time like really dissecting it for everyone. He's like, this is what it actually is. This is how an actual ritual would go. You know, like you got to give rum to Papa Legba so that, you know, he doesn't, you know, mess up the ritual and things like that and all sorts of things. And I thought it was so beautiful to like, you know, and how he was like, this is my particular symbol. I'm not going to show you what all of it means so that you don't know how to like break it essentially. But he's like, people who are also practitioners will come by and be like, oh, that's Roby, you know, that Roby did a practice here. So,
friend.
Oh, really?
Roby's your friend?
Oh.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I was going to ask, was this a really tall lady?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Roby.
Oh.
Yeah, we're pals, and he used to come visit the shop where I worked, and he's in sort of a network of friends that I have there. He's wonderful.
No way. It's such a small world.
It is. Yeah, he was lovely. He's also the reason why JT and I say that people put their foot in something.
Yes.
Because the first thing he said to us, he was like, where are you from? And we're like, Savannah, Georgia. And he goes, oh, they had the best fried chicken there. They put their foot in that. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And so now anytime something's really good, we're like, oh man, they put their foot in that.
It's true.
Heard that before. That's cute.
Yeah.
It's really cute. But he was definitely a person that showed us like what voodoo actually is, and really showed the misinformation, especially by media, even Disney.
Oh my gosh,
Disney with Dr. Facilier.
Are you familiar with the movie Tamara? It's a horror film. I believe it's not a super well-known horror film. And it's about a woman who practices witchcraft, who is set up by a group of like jocks and to be made fun of, and they lure her to a motel room, and they accidentally kill her in the process. You've seen this movie.
Yeah, we watched it.
Yeah, they accidentally kill her in the process of everything, and then she comes back as this super sexual seductress, powerful witch, and kills them one by one. And so as we're talking about like media and that's one of the movies. Now I love that movie because it's a great horror film. It's a great story. But that is one of the movies for me that, made me see witchcraft as such a dark magic.
Well, that movie's got some
when I was younger.
That movie's got some issues just because it's the classic trope of like the awkward nerdy girl, and then she dies and she comes back as
Yeah, but it was the pentagrams and the salt.
Oh yeah,
it was the salt protection circles and all of that stuff that they were incorporating, and
and people didn't understand that both of those are protection tools,
yes,
and not for evil.
Yes, but it looked like evil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting the way the media, your studies, that's super. It's niche and it's interesting and it's super important.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I'm excited, and I did not think that I would find a school that would let me study something like this. I was laughing at myself for writing a paper about the craft and practical magic and intersectionality. Like, who's going to allow me to write that on a graduate level? But I just happened upon the right university where they really let you figure out what you want to research and go from there. So I'm exhausted, I won't lie, because I'm teaching at the same time, but it's definitely a good time.
Is there anything about witchcraft that you want our listeners to know?
I would say don't believe the media.
Understood.
And I would say that if you really want to know something about it, find an individual who you think is trustworthy, who is actually a practitioner, and talk to them.
Gotcha.
I would say that from what I know of witchcraft, of practice, it's beautiful and earth-centered, and it's not at all what we espouse it to be in the media.
Wow.
Absolutely. Go to your local metaphysical shop and somebody will talk to you.
Not like Earthbound, but like
not
an
Earthbound,
actual
but like a local metaphysical shop.
Earthbound.
Yes. Or read books. Books are your best friend when it comes to learning the craft. But it's good to be well researched. And I think too, a lot of people jump into it immediately, are like, I'm gonna do this magical money spell, and it's like, no, don't do that.
Can you? Here's just a kind of like a side question. Can you be Christian and practice witchcraft?
I think the two sort of buck against each other in some ways. But that being said, I have a friend who considers herself, we jokingly call her an Episcowitch, because Episcopalian.
Sure.
Yeah.
She does like root work and spa work and a lot of the like tangible forms of witchcraft.
Sure.
So it works for her.
Absolutely.
I do think it makes sense that like, I think there's something lovely about a lot of different belief systems. So I think some can go together. But I do think Christianity and witchcraft are kind of a tough fit.
Understood. I feel that, like, with my faith, witchcraft, like just watching what Madison does, you know, where she takes where she kind of like takes nature and, you know, and almost analyzes it and you know, feels it and kind of like takes the energy and like feels the energy from it. That, to me, you know, for my faith has always been influenced by how unique nature is. It's like I almost, my opinion is always like, this can't be just created on accident. That's how I've always seen nature. It's like, it's so perfect. Everything is just so wonderful. And obviously a lot of that has to do with evolution and whatnot. But, you know, for me, it's like this, you know, some, like when you see those like bluebirds like out in Madagascar dancing in front of each other, you know, to get a mate, I'm just like, that has to be divinely created. And so even though I don't practice witchcraft, it's kind of a way to, when I see Madison and what she does with nature and all of that, I feel that in a very divine sense, where I'm just like, you're right. Like there is something about nature that, you know, is almost, for me, proof that God exists.
Sure. And I think that's how a lot of people feel, because there are people who consider themselves Christian witches. There are books on it too, if that is something that interests you. I know there's a few people on TikTok who also consider themselves that. And it's an interesting concept.
Sure.
And I think people who practice Christian witchcraft of sorts treat God and Yeshua, or Jesus, however they refer to it, as a deity of sorts, less than like this all-encompassing being that is
Absolutely.
against, you know, that is controlling you. They see it as more of like a relationship, less than just like this being that's telling you what to do.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same way that, you know, there are people who do deity work with other beings of sorts, some Celtic, some, you know, Slavic, some, you know, from Africa, things like that. So I think they treat it in more of like a older way of thinking,
Sure,
and less of the modern form of Christianity.
Is witchcraft malleable to what you want it to be? So like do you have to necessarily define yourself, or can you be, you know, that religious person, no matter what religion, who, you know, maybe goes, I want to practice witchcraft, I want to read some books and all of that, and you know, but I still want to stay religious. Like, can it be that malleable?
I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
Because people are going to believe different things.
Sure.
I think, you know, some people will say, oh, you have to do, from what I understand, will say you have to do this particular ritual this particular way with this purple candle and, you know, and this number of specific items. But other people will say, no, it's more about follow your heart, follow your intuition, check in with your particular spirits, your ancestors. So really, I think it depends on the person. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I completely agree with that. I mean, and there is nothing wrong with, even if you don't practice, just learning. You know, learning it, because that's the best way to understand other people, in my opinion. And I think that's a big part of modern witchcraft, is understanding others and growing your empathy.
Absolutely.
You know, and becoming a better person, because that's a big part of it. It's not all just like ritual work. It's not all just putting water out under the moonlight. It's about understanding yourself as a person and becoming the best version of yourself. Gotcha. Through your practice. And so even if just reading it helps you understand more so about yourself, that's totally fine. You don't have to do the ritual work. You don't have to, you know, wear the crystals and things like that. You don't have to have an altar necessarily. You can, in my opinion, I think you can take what you want from it and move forward. But if you are working with spirits, please protect yourself.
So Madison, Madison, Do you have any other questions for her? Because I have like an ending question.
Yeah. I would definitely say if our viewers want to visit Salem, what would be the best places that you would recommend for people to go to?
That is a phenomenal question.
We'll definitely check out the memorial, and it's right downtown. I would say go to what we call the Witch House, which is a big black spiky house, and it's definitely misnamed because no witch ever lived there, but rather Judge John Corwin, who was one of the main judges during the witchcraft trials. He lived there, but it is the one remaining building from the trials. Salem did what they could to get rid of all of the evidence of the trials, including the buildings that existed from it. But the witch house does still exist, and it's also right downtown. You can walk through it, you can get a tour, it's really cool. If you're a fan of Hocus Pocus, you can walk by the old town hall, and these are all like right in an area that you can walk around and see. Salem's very pedestrian friendly. There's a tour group that I'm probably working with in the spring called Bewitched After Dark. They're fantastic. They don't give you what a tourist necessarily wants. You know, like Absolutely. They give you the real like nuts and bolts of what happened during the trial, and it's a 2-hour tour. It's very interesting. And one of the folk who gives those tours is a practicing witch. The other one is like me; she's an academic. So I would definitely recommend them. Bewitched After Dark. There's a lot of good food here, and just in terms of the outdoors, the waterfront in Salem is really, really beautiful. If you're a fan of walking down by the water, I would recommend that. Those are the big tourist spots that I would recommend. And admittedly, I haven't lived in Salem too terribly long. I've been in New England for about 2 years, but I've only been in Salem for a few months. So I'm sure come across some other places that I would recommend for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, the witch's house is very pretty too. It's just like a very aesthetically pleasing looking house. But yes.
It is.
Awesome. Well, Jay,
For
do
sure.
you want to
Yeah,
ask a question?
I would love to end it by going back to the beginning and asking you, could you possibly give us the rundown, just the entire story of the Salem Witch Trials?
Sure. So I won't be able to get exact dates necessarily.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Essentially what happened is that a group of young girls from the ages of 8 to I think 17, so a wide age range, but you know, the girls who happened to live around each other were playing one night at Reverend Paris's house, and so local minister, and they decided to do a game of fortune telling. And the fortune telling game that they were playing, which we think learned from Tituba, because we don't know anywhere else that they would have learned it, involved taking a glass of water and breaking an egg and separating the whites from the yolk and pouring the whites into the water, and then you're supposed to see it turn into a shape of some kind. And the shape is usually going to be representative of the letter of the person's first name that you're going to marry, or a shape that represents like their job. So they were trying to like play a game of girl talk, like I would have done back in the day.
Yeah.
They were trying to figure out who they were going to marry, and Reverend Paris's little girl Betty, who was the youngest one, saw what she thought was the shape of a coffin, and she thought that meant that she was going to die. So she freaked out. She knew she couldn't talk to her parents about it, because then she would be letting on that she'd played this game of fortune telling and getting all the other girls in trouble. And so she just went mute for a week. So obviously her parents freaked out and they called doctors in, and the first 2 doctors said, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. We don't know what to tell you. The third doctor, Dr. Griggs, I think is his name, said, I think she's been bewitched. And from that point forward, things really started to roll. So then we get Tituba reaching out to Mary Sibley, and we get that pea cake that I mentioned earlier. All the other little girls, either because they wanted attention, or they were bored, or they were actually caught up in the hysteria, or they were actually, I don't know, actually bewitched in some way. I don't think that's the case, but who knows? They all started acting out. So you've got this group of, I think, 5 or 6 girls, and they're all like they're foaming at the mouth, and they're speaking in tongues, and they're rolling around on the floor, and they're lashing out at people, and the parents are at their wits' end, and this looks like demonic possession.
I was about to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it looks really scary. It would look really scary to anyone, but certainly to Puritans, it looks straight up, this is the devil in my house, in my child, this is not okay. So from there, people just start pointing fingers at folks who, thank you, Piper, at folks who make them think of witches. So we get Bridget Bishop as the first one, and then it just sort of steamrolls from there. People who are mentally unwell, old widows, midwives, people who talk back to each other in public, any little thing that might make you look like a non-pious Puritan individual could get you accused of witchcraft.
Okay.
And so eventually this took place over the course of 13 months. While 20 people were killed, there were, I think, 50 or something that were imprisoned, and the prisons were no joke. They were like cells that you couldn't even sit down in, sewage below your feet because like you didn't have anywhere to go to the bathroom, and the river would actually flood the prison. So you'd be standing in your own filth for however long you were in prison. They even imprisoned a 4-year-old girl.
Wow.
Her name was Dorothy. They thought her name was Dorcas, which is a really unfortunate name. Her name has been reported Dorothy. And I'm forgetting her last name, but she was imprisoned with her mom because someone asked her, the little girl, are you a witch? And she said, yes, I'm a witch, and my mom is a witch. And what made her say that, who knows, but she was 4.
Yeah.
And so then she was imprisoned with her mother, who was pregnant. She witnessed her mother give birth in this awful prison cell. And the mom, I want to say mom died, but then Dorothy, it's really sad, just became like the mad woman who went from house to house and ate scraps of food that people left out. So there was a ripple effect that came even after the trials were over.
Wow.
But essentially, what ended them is that the governor who had been out of town came back. His wife had been accused of witchcraft. He was like, oh, no, what? I don't understand. And a bunch of people said, you've got to come back. This is really taking hold of the city, or the area. And he did. And he put an end to it. And released a lot of people from prison. And that was that. So in the end, only 20 people died over the course of 13 months. But I think historically, that's the most that we've had in a certain span of time. So even though like the burning times in Europe, that affected many, many more people than what we're talking about in Salem. Salem, it was a much more claustrophobic event, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's wild.
That The witch trials are just, there's a reason why people are so interested in it still to this day.
Yeah.
Because it's a horrific thing that happened in history, but it's good to learn from it, and that's always.
How many people do you think thinks that the Salem Witch Trials, like, they were actually like witches? Like, how much of America, or just people that know about it, don't know what you just said? Like,
gosh, I don't know. I feel like the people I run into assumes that everybody was innocent, but that being said, I don't run into a decent number of the folks in the country who might be inclined to say that, like, if they were witches, they got what they deserved or something like that. But I bet there is a subset of the population.
Yeah.
Well,
who believes.
I think they don't really teach it in public schools anyway.
No, they definitely don't.
It's like you get further into some of the more rural parts of America. I'm sure they're probably like, hey. Like,
yeah.
So
yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. But it is interesting. And I'm thankful that you actually told us like the actual happenings of it, because it is one of those stories that
I think that's what like a lot of this episode is kind of like just clarifying for everyone. Maybe there's some listeners who don't know, all of what we're just talking about. It's like clarifying, what is actual like witchcraft.
Absolutely.
Like, what is it really?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
For sure. And we have an exclusive interview on Patreon with Julie soon that Chris conducted when he was up there live.
Yep. So if you enjoyed this episode, definitely consider becoming a Parajunkie. And yes, if you didn't realize, our patrons are called the Parajunkies, thanks to Chris, because he says ghost heroin all too often at this point. But yes, so if you enjoyed this, definitely go check that out and consider becoming a patron. You can find us at patreon.com/Savannah Underground. But with that, JT, do you have anything else you would like to say?
Nope, not at all. Just thank you, Julie. That was fun.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Well, with that, my name is Madison Timmons.
And I'm JT Timmons.
And stay spooky, y'all.